Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, March the 12th, 2021. Well, I'll start off giving you an update about the lunatic directly across the street who was screaming death threats. Yesterday afternoon, I mentioned that two female bicycle cops had eventually shown up, and they had a little talk with him. And then I thought that he had gone away with his 4 bags of stuff. Then I saw him before yesterday's show in the parking lot of this hotel in a very strange position. It seemed that he was his anger was spent. And then he showed up in the parking lot again, and he was screaming obscenities. No death threats this time. Just many obscenities delivered at the top of his voice, including what one may call many homophobic remarks. He stayed the night on the grass, just on the other side of the sidewalk. He was there at midnight. He was still awake, and he clearly slept the night there. I woke up this morning and looked out, and there he was. And he's still there. He appears to have gone into the Paul's Motor Inn. I don't really know what the dispute was. He is now outside with his 4 bags and has somehow acquired a bicycle. So the story is not over yet. Hello to Head McNick, Pelcasso 88, and William Hicks. I'm going to start today by talking about old Slow Joe's address to the American nation last night. Reading the transcript of the speech, I was really shocked by its insouciance, that his speech resembles remarks that an emperor might make to a crowd of supplicants. He is all-powerful, it would appear, and all of the benefits that Americans derive. In fact, all of the joy or happiness in their life comes from the government of the United States through President Joe Biden. But I'll begin at the top of his speech and see if you can figure out what's missing from it. Hint, passive voice. He begins, tonight, I'd like to talk to you about where we are as we mark 1 year since everything stopped because of the pandemic. A year ago, we were hit with a virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked. Denials for days, weeks, then months that led to more deaths, more infections, more stress, and more loneliness. Photos and videos from 2019 feel like they were taken in another era. The last vacation, the last birthday with friends, the last holiday with the extended family. While it was different for everyone, we all lost something, a collective suffering, a collective sacrifice, a year filled with the loss of life and the loss of living for all of us. You see, the planted axiom here is that somehow COVID-19 shut down the economy and smothered society. That's not what happened. Local health officials in cities and states who were given powers or assumed powers decided on lockdowns, which smashed the economy and smothered society. This, it's simply one does not follow the other. There have been pandemics in America before, but never was it decided to take revenge against the healthy, to isolate not the sick, but the healthy. Biden continues, but in the loss, we saw how much there was to gain in appreciation, respect, and gratitude. Finding light in the darkness is a very American thing to do. In fact, it may be the most American thing we do. And that's what we've done. I know it's been hard. I truly know. As I've told you before, I carry a card in my pocket with the number of Americans who have died from COVID to date. It's on the back of my schedule, and as of now, the total deaths in America, 527,726. That's more deaths than in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War and 9/11 combined. You've seen this comparison before, and it is utterly fatuous. There is an enormous difference between wars, the whole point of which is for people to kill another, and a virus. A virus is not the result of human agency, and wars are. In any event, America entered World War II in December 1941, and this lasted until August 1945. America was in World War I for a little more than a year. Vietnam War lasted, 10 years or more? This militarization of a disease, it's sickening. So Biden talks about how he feels personally connected to this because decades ago, his father lost his job in Scranton. You lost your job, you closed your business. No, the government closed the businesses. Facing eviction, homelessness, hunger, a loss of control, and maybe worst of all, a loss of hope. Yes, I guess a loss of hope could be possibly one result from smashing the economy and smothering society. It's all enacted a terrible cost on the psyche of so many of us. Again, this passive talk. Now, it's obvious to anyone except idiots that there are gains and there are losses from any government decision. But no, apparently there was no consideration, again, that these lockdowns, which smashed the economy and smothered society, along with the terror induced by social distancing and mandatory mask using, well, yes, this could lead to a loss of hope. Too often, Biden says, we've turned against each other. No, actually, it was governments in the United States who turned against its citizens. Vicious hate crimes against Asian Americans who have been attacked, harassed, blamed, and scapegoated. Oh, yes. So Black people attack Asians on the streets of America, and this is Donald Trump's fault. Look, we know what we need to do to beat this virus. Tell the truth. Follow the. That's why I'm using every power I have as president of the United States to put us on a war footing to get the job done. It sounds like hyperbole, but I mean it. A war footing. The purpose of war is to kill people and destroy things. You remember the war on drugs, the war on cancer, the war on everything. These military metaphors are not helpful, and they are, in fact, sinister. So he talks about vaccines, strangely without mentioning Operation Warp Speed. Now, you've heard me talk about Operation Warp Speed in the past. I do not think that it was a good idea, and what the consequences of it are going to be are, well, they're unfolding, but they are unknown still. So the emperor says now, millions and millions of grandparents who went months without being able to hug their grandkids can now do so. Thank you, Emperor Joe. People are allowed to hug each other again. Could you imagine just, I don't know, a little more than a year ago, the President of the United States taking upon himself the right to determine whether people are allowed to hug one another? Absolutely astonishing. Oh, and the 4th of July. Here's the point, Biden said. If we do all this, if we do our part, if we do this together by July the 4th, there's a good chance you, your families, and friends will be able to get together in your backyard or in your neighborhood and have a cookout and a barbecue and celebrate Independence Day. That doesn't mean large events with lots of people together, but it does mean small groups will be able to get together. After this long, hard year, that will make this Independence Day something truly special will we not only mark our independence as a nation, but we begin to mark our independence from the virus. Where is it written in the Constitution that the President of the United States determines how Americans may celebrate Independence Day? How many people will be allowed at barbecues? Yes, Emperor Joe speaks. Oh, and are schools going to open? Apparently not until just an astonishing amount of money is spent. So let's have a look at the chat. Hello, buddy. Anran says, did you tell him to cool it with the homophobic remarks? No, I never made eye contact with this fellow, and I don't intend to. Buddy, have you ever clapped back at anyone? I try to avoid that sort of thing, especially when I'm dealing with lunatics. Metal Mike says, well, this virus just may be the result of human agency. Claire Caw says the matriarchy is moral decay. Steve says there is no president. Biden is just a vague, human-shaped presence like a shadow uttering words written by someone else. Emperor Malarkey I, says Paul Picasso, 88. What does Jim Kunstler have to say? How reassured were you by Joe Biden's speech to the nation Thursday night? The more his managers pretend that he's in charge of anything, the more unlikely it actually seems. So they wound him up, Adderall would be my guess, to fortify the attention span, and rolled him out like the mummy of Amenhotep III. And one could just imagine the leaders of this and that foreign nation cringing or cackling in their seats to see this embodiment of collapsing America go through his spiritless ritual motions. Mostly, what did not fly is the idea that the COVID-19 virus can still be used as a cattle prod for herding citizens into feedlots of compliance. Americans are buffaloes, not steers. They are determined now to take care of business, and the main business of people with any initiative will be to rig up some sort of gainful occupation while the lumbering old systems break down. They will do it despite orders to operate at 50% capacity or close at 9 o'clock or be handcuffed by rinky-dink regulations. They'll have to get creative to figure out ways around all the official impediments to making a living. This group of not yet undead will resist further attempts to restrict their liberty and to steal the fruits of their own enterprise to pay for other people's failures or lack of enterprise. The federal government is one system visibly working to destroy itself with epic giveaways of money it pretends to command and control. The COVID-19 stimulus bill will only accelerate its loss of credibility. A $1,400 check won't solve the problems of their creditors and landlords. It won't solve the problems of people a year behind on mortgage payments or rent. And if you think that shortchanging that class of people is a good idea, you're beating a path straight to the death of credit, per se, and then of our money, the dollar, which is based on credit. Taxpayers are not so stupid that they'll fail to notice who's being asked to bail out bankrupt states, irresponsible cities, and pension funds, and there's going to be trouble over that. The trouble will express itself both in political strife and in the further decay of the relationship between work and wealth. It means a collapsing standard of living for most people. Turning the one-shot $1,400 into a monthly guaranteed basic income can only be a short-term shuck and jive when a loaf of bread goes from $5 to $15 to $50, which can happen easily and quickly, too, as lots of free money chases crashing productivity. Wait for it. Meanwhile, the party in charge of things is squandering the last of its moral authority in stupid and tyrannical woke crusades against free speech and free thought. They went after Washington and Jefferson last year. This month, it's a purge of cartoon characters, starting with an auto-da-fe over at the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes lot. Disney better watch out because they'll be coming after Mickey Mouse next for acting white. Which brings us to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the abysmal condition of race relations in the USA, expressly sponsored by the Democratic Party. The left's promotion of the supreme conspiracy theory du jour that white supremacy stifles and suppresses people of color in everything they endeavor has inspired provocation so dastardly that they are driving the country to racial war. The rioting and looting season is upon us again, and the perfect stage set for the opening offensive is Minneapolis, where the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin just kicked off this week. Black Lives Matter is marshaling its troops outside the courthouse to intimidate jurors and threaten mob violence against an outcome they may not like. The facts of this case suggest that former Officer Chauvin has a sturdy defense, starting with Minneapolis police training films that show officers how to apply the same knee restraint that Chauvin used on George Floyd. It was in their instruction manual, too. Add to that the forensic reports that show fentanyl levels in Floyd's bloodstream several times above what would likely kill a normal person, plus meth, plus marijuana. He had an enlarged heart and was COVID-19 positive at the time of his death. And of course, he was not complying with the cops' orders during his arrest, which is exactly what led to him being physically subdued. None of that will matter to BLM because the video of Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck was such a perfect poster for the white supremacy meme, whatever the reality of the situation was, and it's just too rich in coercion value to let go of. I predict trouble in the streets no matter which way the Chauvin trial ends up, just because energies are up and the weather is good. It will be infectious in cities across the nation again because the dividend of getting to loot is such a temptation, and the last time that happened, the authorities did nothing to stop it. How will it go this time? By now, shop owners in Minneapolis and elsewhere must have gotten the message that the police are not interested in defending their places of business. Their bosses, the politicians, ordered them not to. Some business owners may opt for defending the property themselves. Imagine the cognitive dissonance that will make for as Nancy Pelosi's Congress tries to pass new gun control laws. If Joe Biden is even around, will he step up and tell BLM and Antifa to cut it out? Or will he just ignore all that as he did during the election campaign last year? Half the country, at least, won't stand for it anymore. In the meantime, God knows what will be happening at financial markets and banks as all that new money floods an economy that can't produce enough to absorb it. Racial war and runaway inflation, not a good recipe for political continuity. Christopher Bedford writes in The Federalist, if this week you learned Biden is hopeful and Tucker Carlson is evil, congratulations, you've been lied to. Biden tells nation there is hope after a devastating year. Hopeful, Biden says, I need you. Biden sets vaccine goal that would allow Americans to gather by July the 4th. These headlines from the covers of the printed New York Times, LA Times, and Boston Globe greeted Americans Friday morning, 51 days into the Biden presidency and a full year into the beginnings of America's long lockdown experiment. 7 takeaways from Biden's primetime address topped CNN's site. Chris Salitz's first 2 takeaways: Donald Trump dug the hole was number 1. Number 2, a return to empathy. Chris Cillizza, it's worth noting, is a 45-year-old man and does not work for the White House. Last night is why Joe Biden won the presidency. Political Playbook opened with a straight face. If you hadn't watched the president's primetime address, you might think it was anything other than the most depressing, defeated, and resigned speech since President Jimmy Carter held the office. You might think he hadn't devoted his 3rd sentence to a baseless attack on his predecessor and the entire rest of his address to death, sadness, loneliness, and despair. You might think that he hadn't literally threatened the American people, warning, we may have to reinstate restrictions to get back on track. Please, we don't want to do that again. Rather, to read the Washington Post homepage featured commentary on the address, you'd think much of that speech was about hope. It was about seeing a shaft of light at the end of a dark horror. Robin Given, a 56-year-old woman who once won a Pulitzer for witty, closely observed essays that transformed fashion criticism into cultural criticism. His white French cuffs and his crisp pocket square, she went on to tell us, evoked all of the institutional power and authority at his disposal to make things better. His mere presence on television was a declaration of his pride in the country's progress. If you're wondering why you didn't see any of this, don't worry, it didn't happen. But more and more, we will have to take a step back, throw some water on our faces, and look around in disbelief at the state of our corporate media. Take the other big story of the week. Fox News' Tucker Carlson dared say that America, faced with a vicious China growing stronger every day, shouldn't pat itself on the back for its military featuring maternity flight suits. This is so obvious it shouldn't need to be said at all, but the Pentagon felt the need to react anyways, launching a full-on broadside on his heresy. Senator Tammy Duckworth, a veteran whose Black Hawk was shot down by insurgents, launched a fundraiser for her campaign called F. Tucker Carlson. The commander of Space Force filmed an unintentionally hysterical video on his webcam, reminding his delicate troops that Tucker, thinking pregnant women aren't ideal fighting machines, quote, is based off of actually 0 days of serving in the armed forces. So what does all this have to do with the corporate media? Reporters in unison chased the ball. And like that, just one day after the Pentagon or someone at it leaked the classified report showing the Chinese military dominating the United States in a Pacific war game, the news cycle changed to Tucker Carlson. Bad. Throw the ball and they'll chase it. It's a good trick. President Donald Trump knew it well if he played it differently. Gateway pundit Brian Harrison, the former Health and Human Services Chief of Staff, joined Rob Schmidt on Newsmax TV on Thursday night. And he said, like every other member of the Obama-Biden COVID team was fully aware, not just of the existence of Trump's plan, but they knew the plan in great detail. I personally led the first transition briefing between the outgoing Trump administration and the incoming Biden administration. And I'll tell you what the topic was. The topic was Operation Warp Speed. Even further to the point, the topic was vaccine distribution planning. So they knew there was a plan. They've been, quite frankly, executing on a plan. I've probably never seen a president or vice president in American history simultaneously executing on a plan while denying its existence. Molly Hemingway of the Federalist talks about the real corruption of the corporate media. She said, quote, there's a difference between having being full of leftists in your newsroom than actually engaging in propaganda and their rewriting of everything. That's happening at the current moment, defining a very divisive administration that is engaged in full-on culture war, tearing down the borders of the country, making all sorts of mistakes in foreign policy. Portraying that as a unifying and good administration is propaganda, and half the country realizes that, and the other half of the country, I think, is comforted by that propaganda. It's appalling. The White House told reporters that they wanted them to say that this speech was uplifting and hopeful. And so reporters did that, or these propaganda outlets did that, when in fact it was anything but. It was remarkably ungracious. There was no mention of what the previous administration did. The only thing that has really worked in this entire coronavirus pandemic is developing the vaccine, unquote. But as I say, it is true. The vaccines are due to Donald Trump and his Operation Warp Speed and the protections that the pharmaceutical companies have. They can't be sued if the vaccines go all J.G. Ballard. From Breitbart, Alex Marlow was on Tucker Carlson. He was asked, what do you think Biden left out of tonight's speech? And Marlow said, it seemed like he left out virtually everything other than the guy really likes vaccines and masks. He didn't talk about personal responsibility. He didn't talk about the government's role in any of these anti-science lockdowns. He didn't talk nearly enough about the fact that we could probably open up all our schools today. He didn't talk about the fact that this virus came from China. He didn't talk about the fact that the virus is coming over our borders. I want to know how he's going to hold people accountable who are responsible for these policies that cram sick patients into our nursing homes, killing way more people than necessary. There's no justice for these people, and it certainly doesn't look like Joe Biden has any interest in investigating. Well, dogs don't bite dogs, as they say, and the governors who are responsible for the policies that killed tens of thousands of Americans are all Democrats. Steve Watson at Summit News, an NPR, a PBS, and Marist poll has found that almost half of President Trump's supporters have no plans to take a coronavirus shot. The surveys found that 47% who identified as supporters of the former president say they will not choose to be vaccinated when the jab is made available to them. Broadened out to Republicans on the whole, 41% said they wouldn't take a vaccine, while only 11% of Democrats said they do not plan to get a shot. Altogether, almost two-thirds of Americans say they have already taken a vaccine or plan to get one when they can. The poll also provided some data on lockdowns, with around three-quarters of Republicans expressing the opinion that it's time for states to open up for the sake of the economy. On the other hand, 78% of Democrats believe that lockdowns must remain in place as long as there is a health risk. If they seriously mean this, it means that lockdowns will last forever. In an address watched by virtually no one, Joe Biden claimed that all Americans will be eligible for a vaccine from May the 1st. So, do lockdowns work? Well, that's what the experts tell us. Of course, not all experts. Dr. Fauci. What does Chuck DeVore at The Federalist have to say? The government response to COVID-19 has mostly been a failure. Theatric, yes. See New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's Emmy. Symbolic, yes, but there is no evidence shutdowns did anything but deepen the economic suffering, increase suicides, and prevent life-saving medical tests and treatment. Last May, in The Federalist, I examined state-level unemployment through April, using job losses as a proxy for the severity of government-imposed shutdowns. Finding these even then that suggested lockdowns had no effect on the course of a virus appeared by what appears to be sloppy lab procedures in Wuhan, China. When you're on, has anything changed? What does the data say? Does anything suggest that lockdowns were worth it? The change in private employment among the states from January 2020 to December 2020, the latest month for which data is available, can be used as a proxy for the severity of government edicts to slow the spread of the virus. It represents closed restaurants and family-owned businesses, destroyed lives, and life savings. In theory, this pain should have been rewarded with a lower COVID fatality rate. That's what we were told as we obediently stayed at home. Yet the data shows no benefit earned by the states that inflicted the largest destruction on their job base, judging by the fatality rates from COVID. Another constant feature of the corporate media's COVID-19 coverage was the claim red states were killing their people. Again, the data after a year shows no correlation between a state's level of freedom, as measured by the Fraser Institute in their annual Economic Freedom of North American survey, and COVID fatalities. However, there is a modest correlation between economic freedom and the strength of the job market over the past year, although it is important to note that the correlation between freedom and the state level and job creation has been a long-term trend, one that COVID-19 did not change. Deeping digger into the data, a regression analysis seeking correlations to per capita COVID-19 fatalities at the state level to 5 variables: use of mass transit, change in private sector employment, economic freedom, share of the population 65 and older, and the percentage of adults with obesity in 2020, finds only a weak connection. Only 2 variables are significant in this correlation: the share of mass transit use and the prevalence of obesity. This would suggest that the virus takes its course regardless of the severity of shutdowns. That's not to say that any government action is futile. For instance, the Trump administration's effort to speed development of an effective vaccine. Yes, and you know what I think about that. And from Canada, it seemed that the Canadian Catholic hierarchy was about to actually act on Catholic theology. But no, they were got to somehow, it would appear, or they just realized that, no, government makes the decisions, not God. This is from the CBC. The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops today dialed back a message to Roman Catholics suggesting that they choose alternatives to the AstraZeneca vaccine because of its association with abortion-derived cell lines. The CCCB said earlier this month that parishioners should try to avoid taking viral vector vaccines like those produced by AstraZeneca Oxford because they were developed using cell lines that may have derived from an abortion nearly 50 years ago. Today, however, the The CCCB sent out what is called a clarification message saying that all COVID-19 vaccines that are medically approved by the relevant health authorities may be licitly received by Catholics. In other words, what Canada's Catholic bishops are saying is that if the government approves it, it is no longer sinful. And a humorous story from Petula Dvorak at the Washington Post. For some, wearing a mask is liberating. Freedom is slavery. Get it? A year into the pandemic, a lot has changed. If we're reminded of that every time we go outside, if we go outside, masks have joined the traditional don't leave home without them trifecta of keys, wallets, and phones, and they are here to stay. There are folks who hate them, who can't breathe through them, or who think they're a sign of political oppression. But for others, the widespread use of masks has made the past year one of liberation. With a mask, you can sing in the grocery store. No, you are not allowed to sing in the grocery store. You're not allowed to sing in church, if churches are even open, because singing spreads the dreaded corona doom. Talk to yourself in a walk, grimace in the gym, leave the spinach in your teeth, have coffee breath, forget lipstick, and no one is the wiser. Oh, the savings on Altoids and L'Oreal this past year. Folks on social media write little odes to the masked life. I love wearing a mask. I want to do this forever. It has helped my social anxiety so much. And wearing a mask is really letting me be ugly in peace. I love it here. One librarian, much loved by local kids on the West Coast, says she loves being able to go to do errands without being recognized by her tiny fans. Yes, the mask makes people anonymous, and we all want to be anonymous, right? Isn't that the highest goal? You know, in stochastic universe, we're just atoms routinely moving from one place to another, controlled by forces that we do not understand, that we cannot control. I don't think I could ever go back to not wearing a mask, says Donna Bauer, a 40-ish Twitter maven in Orlando, Florida. Maven, really? I like not catching colds, not wearing makeup, and not being noticed, Bauer said. So even vaccinated and with herd immunity, I'm still going to be hiding behind it. Welcome to autistic America. My 16-year-old son made me think about this. Yes, he's a teen who comes with all the familiar afflictions of his gender and age. Afflictions of his gender. Hey, kid, Dvorak's son, your mom hates you because you're a boy. And she is writing about that in the Washington Post. What a world we live in. Network Contagion Research Institute. Have you ever heard of this? Well, apparently these are the people who decide what can be said and what can't be said amongst other things, lockdowns. Because as we learned from a research piece led by Alexander Reed Ross, who's a senior research fellow at the Network Contagion Research Institute, people who are not in favor of the lockdowns are conspiracy theorists. They're the same people who believe that our politicians are actually aliens. You know, there's a word for that, and it's called poisoning the well. Many thought it was the Russians. Others felt it was Trump. Some thought it was pedophiles needing to be locked up in Guantanamo Bay. Others thought it was QAnon or the Proud Boys, perhaps Antifa or Soros. History being what it is, as the lists get thinner, the anti-Semites also suspect the Jews. Yeah, here we go. No such thing as a conspiracy theory. Yeah. What about the invasion of Iraq in 2003? Huh? That was a real conspiracy to lie about an imaginary threat. And how many trillions of dollars were wasted and how many hundreds of thousands of people died as a result. But no conspiracy theories. And the latrine wallahs must be put in charge of what is permissible speech. Speaking of Alexander Reed Ross, a story from the Daily Dot, the Daily Beast is facing intense backlash over an op-ed that claims members from the Dirtbag Left, a collection of leftist podcasters and Twitter personalities, are cozying up with right-wing extremists. The roughly 4,500-word article posits that leftist media personalities are legitimizing and even adopting far-right views. The piece's author, Alexander Reed Ross, bases his conclusion on his subject's tweets, podcast appearances, comedic bits, and the like. The story has been met with a thorough online thrashing of Ross and the Daily Beast, while a few have praised it more, including many of the story subjects, and their associates have mocked it as ill-informed, inaccurate, and unsupported by the evidence. They claim Ross has taken things out of context in an effort to malign them with what Max Blumenthal, a subject of Ross's earlier and retracted reporting, called McCarthyite smears. Several have claimed Ross has a history of shoddy, biased reporting. Ross and the Daily Beast have stood by the stories. This is the old consanguinity game. Yes, I danced with a man who once danced with a woman who once danced with the Prince of Wales. You know, if you look hard enough, you can find connections between any two people on earth. Or you could connect, one person to any number of people and then connect them and connect them and connect them. And eventually you end up with Hitler or some such. This is such a shoddy technique. It's a useless technique, except in destroying people's lives. The too long didn't read from this affair is that anyone who is not a full-on supporter of Joe Biden is a white supremacist. That's what we have been reduced to. And here is a story from conservativewoman.co.uk by Sonia Elijah. Never have statisticians, mathematical biologists, psychologists, anthropologists, behavioral scientists, and a few epidemiologists dictated government policy to such an extreme degree as over the past year. On March 25th, 2020, the Coronavirus Act received royal assent, having been fast-tracked through Parliament in 4 working days. The act contained emergency powers to enable public bodies to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Government Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, or SAGE, and its subcommittees became the de facto leader of the operation. This was the point at which the UK ceased to be governed by elected representatives. To this day, SAGE do not answer to the public. They don't even answer to the government. They advise the government on all things COVID, and the government is then led by the data to implement the most draconian restrictions on freedom in our nation's history. SAGE are accountable to no one. In my opinion, SAGE have staged a covered coup, and hardly anybody has taken notice, let alone the mainstream media. And she looks at the chief members here, some of whose names you'll recognize: Patrick Vallance, Chris Whitty, Jonathan Van Tam, Sharon Peacock, Graham Medley, the notorious Neil Ferguson, James Rubin, Peter Horby, and John Edmonds. She informs us, if you take a closer look at the key experts, they all have had connections in some way with either big pharma, big tech, or the big NGOs, such as GAVI, the Vaccine Alliance, World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, World Bank, Wellcome Trust, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Many have had their research funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust. In fact, the UK is the biggest beneficiary of university grants given by the Gates Foundation, with $744 million dispersed to 38 universities, the top beneficiaries being Imperial College London, where Neil Ferguson resides, University College London, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, King's College London, and Oxford University. Many of the key SAGE members have held senior positions in the pharmaceutical industry before being government advisors, and some hold shares in the pharmaceutical companies they worked for. In September 2020, The Telegraph revealed that Sir Patrick Vallance, government chief scientific advisor, had £600,000 worth of shares in GlaxoSmithKline, which was contracted to develop a coronavirus vaccine. In December 2020, the British Medical Journal wrote that by July, the UK government has signed a coronavirus vaccine deal for an undisclosed sum with GlaxoSmithKline, securing 60 million doses of an untested treatment that is still being developed. If this is not a blatant conflict of interest, I don't know what is. Valance not only held GSK shares, but was also president of research and development at GSK from 2012 to 2017. It was while he was president in 2013, a partnership between GSK and the Gates Foundation was announced to accelerate research into vaccines for global health needs. As a researcher at the LHSTM, Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty received £31 million in funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for malaria research. His deputy, Professor Jonathan Van Tam, joined the pharmaceutical industry as an associate director at SmithKline Beecham, now GSK, in 2000. He was head of medical affairs at Roche in 2001 and went on to work at Aventis Pasteur MSD as the UK medical director the following year. Many other such examples. But as we see, the notion that we are getting disinterested advice from these experts is preposterous. And moving on to lockdown skeptics. Education Secretary faces legal challenge over face masks in the classroom. Gavin Williamson has been sent a letter before action by lawyers acting for the National Deaf Children's Society, who say the guidance is unlawful and must be urgently changed. 2/3 of COVID cases in school children are false positives, say experts. Biostatisticians are concerned that infections in the community are now so low that false positives and negatives are vastly outnumbering true cases, leading to real cases being missed and families needlessly being asked to isolate. Previously positive tests were confirmed using a more accurate polymer assay chain reaction PCR lab test, but this week the government admitted that it quietly scrapped the process at the end of January. And if you use this PCR lab test at times 40, you're going to get about 97% false positives. The latest figures from Test and Trace in secondary schools found 328 positives out of 663,000 tests between February 25th and March 5th. That's 1 in 2,000 pupils, which is far lower than the 1 in 270 that the ONS survey has suggested to be the current community prevalence. An essay by James Morton Wakely, a former parliamentary researcher with a PhD in history from Oxford, the uniformity of the new ruling class and the games that one must play to enter it, explains the consensus on lockdown. The political class is naturally drawn to power, meaning that its members are often keen to signal how on board they are with elite projects. This distorts the line between those responsible for policy and those who should critique it. It is evident in the tendency of mainstream journalists to discuss the pandemic within the framework set by lockdown, rather than to think outside the box, or in their total failure to ask probing questions of ministers and state scientists. They can further tell one another that they are being responsible by refusing to question a government policy designed, of course, to save lives. But this means that they partake in the state's management of society rather than in holding power to account. Many journalists will also avoid criticizing lockdown because a lot of those who do are political class undesirables, notably Donald Trump, with whom they do not want to appear associated. It often appears to be a political class article of faith that frequently unreasonable people cannot, in fact, say reasonable things. Again, if we go back to James Burnham's The Machiavellians, which we shall do shortly, we see that the failure to ensure circulation of elites, the failure to allow alternative elite, becomes increasingly poisonous to elites' control. The stricter the lockdown, the greater the economic hit. The UK's economy is suffering worse than others because of the strictness of its lockdowns, new data shows. Kate Andrews has written on this well-established relationship in The Spectator. The Spectator highlighted new data from the OECD last week that offers a weekly update comparing a country's current GDP levels to the previous year. It continues to show the UK experiencing some of the highest levels of economic damage. If you factor in lockdown stringency, you can also make out a rough correlation between countries under the strictest lockdowns and countries taking the biggest hits to GDP. Now, supposedly, the stricter the lockdown, well, that means that COVID is going to be eradicated and people can go back to work and society can resume, but that is not what we have seen. And it's not what we continue to see, with Joe Biden holding a carrot of having barbecues on the 4th of July in order to coerce compliance. Italy set to impose national lockdown over Easter weekend, and apparently Germany is going crazy again. I don't know. As the old joke goes, the beatings will continue until morale improves. Let's go to Alex Berenson, see what he has to say. And here we go. I've now heard from 2 different people in the last 72 hours that New York and some neighboring states have no child, adolescent, inpatient psych beds available, none at any price. Congratulations, panic porners and teachers unions. You win. Nothing to see here, folks. Just a 49-year-old man and a 42-year-old woman having heart attacks minutes after being vaccinated. Coincidence? No doubt. Definitely stick around a few minutes after you get the jab, though, just for the heck of it. It's a strange thing that's happened, that people who die of heart attacks, who die of cancer, who die in car accidents, they had COVID-19. So what was the cause of death? Well, it was COVID-19, obviously. I mean, it has to be. And to doubt this makes you a conspiracy theorist and, in fact, a murderer. Okay, how about people all over the world receiving injections and then dying shortly thereafter? There's no connection. This is what they're actually saying. There is no connection. It's just coincidental. It's entirely coincidental. Berenson writes, fun fact, the COVID mRNA vaccines now account for more side effects to VAERS since December than every other vaccine combined in the last year, and 8 times the number of death reports. Many of you are emailing asking about Geert Vanden Bosch's claim that vaccines could drive the rise of his SARS-CoV-2 superstrain. The issues he raises are deeply technical, and I do not feel qualified to comment. As a rule, I'm very wary of apocalyptic predictions. I try to stick to concerns that data support. For example, I think concerns about miscarriage risk make sense, but the theory that vaccines cause infertility is purely speculative. Pure speculation plays into the hands of people who want to dismiss more grounded issues. Thus, I don't find it helpful. To me, Berenson writes, the most important issues about the vaccines, especially the mRNAs, are serious side effect possible, real-world evidence, infection rise after dose 1, lack of proven long-term efficacy, increasing pressure to mandate them. That's plenty. So let's go back to the chat. Anticipatory phobia, says Hikmah Warrior. Imagine the existence of people who are apparently delighted that they will, for the rest of their lives, wear a mask when they leave their homes. What sort of monsters are we breeding now? Roulette Crack says, haven't taken it, won't take it. My life is in good hands, not some state-funded dweeb. Roulette Crack says, strange how after they take the vaccine, they are still not cured of their fear of living. Geez Hestyle says, it's amazing how vetting politicians for conflict of interest isn't a thing unless they fail to carry water for those in power. the citizenry sleep when politicians deliver the tyranny with a smile. Well, last night, Joe Biden, it's not advisable for Joe Biden to smile because, of course, he's had so much plastic surgery done, so much hacked off his face that he now has the Joker look, as they call it in the industry. And when he smiles, it is terrifying. We're talking about dog breeds now? Dogs love food, says Debrias. Oh, you see how much you can learn reading the KMG show chat? Gandalf White 2 says, I hate white supremacy, so I love Grandpa Joe. I would never want to disappoint Alexander Reed Ross. I still try to look decent on my sallies, says Kwachu Lango. The vast archipelagos of discarded masks are starting to form, says Chocoken 666. Okay, so we're going to talk about something different now. We're going to talk about The Bachelor. Rose-scented decadence. I am aware of the existence of this show. I am also aware that it seems to have a hypnotizing effect on many members of the elite, or at least the aspirational class, particularly women, or perhaps exclusively women, obsessed with this fake reality show. According to Wiki, The Bachelor is an American dating and relationship reality television series that debuted on March the 25th, 2002. That is to say that it is almost 19 years old. The show is hosted by Chris Harrison. Not for long. As the flagship of the original The Bachelor franchise, its success resulted in several spin-offs, including The Bachelorette, Bachelor Pad, Bachelor in Paradise, Bachelor in Paradise After Paradise, The Bachelor Winter Games, The Bachelor Presents Listen to Your Heart, The Bachelor, The Greatest Seasons Ever, and The Bachelor Summer Games, as well as spawning many international editions of the show. The series revolves around a single bachelor who begins with a pool of romantic interests from whom he is expected to select a wife. Yes, that's how we select our wives these days, through a fake game show. During the course of the season, The Bachelor eliminates candidates, each week eventually culminating in a marriage proposal to his final selection. The participants travel to romantic and exotic locations for the dates, and the conflicts in the series, both internal and external, stem from the elimination-style format of this show. You know, apparently there is not enough humiliation in romantic rejection without televising it and broadcasting it to millions of people. The above description is simply a general guideline. In practice, the show does not always follow its design structure, and those variations are often a source of drama and conflict. They may include, among other events, a candidate who was eliminated returns to the show to plead her case to the bachelor. A bachelor distributes more or fewer roses than planned. A bachelor eliminates a woman outside of the normal elimination process. For example, a bachelor may eliminate both women on a 2-on-1 date. The bachelor chooses to pursue a relationship with his final selection rather than propose marriage. Okay. And the bachelor is in serious trouble because of, George Floyd. Fancy that. This is an entirely serious story from the Los Angeles Times. Greg Braxton. Last summer, Disney promised change. Then the first Black Bachelor season unraveled. Outrage, grief, anger, sorrow. That's actually how this story begins. With those words, the Walt Disney Company's top executives were determined to send a clear message after the killing of George Floyd and other unarmed black men, which sparked massive nationwide protests last summer. Racial justice at Disney would be a top objective. In a May 30th memo to employees, Disney Chief Executive Robert Chapek, Executive Chairman Bob Iger, and Chief Diversity Officer LaTondra Newton resolve to use our compassion, our creative ideas, and our collective sense of humanity to ensure we are fostering a culture that acknowledges our people's feelings and their pain. Yes, if this is really true, then why didn't you cancel all of your reality shows? Because the point of these shows is to humiliate people before millions of people. Openness and dialogue would be prioritized. Quote, we intend to focus our efforts and resources to compassionately and constructively talk about these matters openly and honestly as we seek solutions. We intend to keep the conversation going, not just today, but for as long as it takes to bring about real change, unquote. Less than 2 weeks later, real change came to The Bachelor, one of the most valuable franchises on the Disney-owned ABC, and one whose history has long been clouded by its handling of race. After years of resistance by the show's producers against casting a black bachelor, including a contentious legal battle, commercial real estate agent Matt James was announced as the show's first black leading man. The news was thrilling for a legion of fans, particularly black members of the Bachelor Nation fan base who had lobbied for years for a black bachelor. Adding to their excitement were James's co-stars, a diverse group of beautiful women, all hoping to be his bride-to-be. I was really excited to see Matt and how his journey of love would unfold, said Ashley Tabron, a high school teacher in North Carolina who started watching the show in 2017 when Rachel Lindsay made history as the first black bachelorette. I thought he was a good guy. I was also impressed by how diverse the cast of women were. There were a lot more black or women of color than ever before, and I was excited to see their stories. But a fairy tale ending to James's quest for true love is unlikely in Monday's season finale, with James poised to choose between graphic designer Rachel Kirkconnell and elementary school teacher Michelle Young when he offers the final rose. Instead, The Bachelor is in crisis mode, caught up in a firestorm involving racism, online abuse, and questions about the future of besieged Bachelor host Chris Harrison, who has relinquished his role in the After the Final Rose special to author and former NFL linebacker Emmanuel Acho. The season proper was filmed months ago. The dark side of Bachelor Nation has also reemerged amid the fallout after Lindsay, who has faced bullying from fans before, was attacked online with racial slurs after a contentious TV interview with Harrison about racist allegations circling Kirkconnell. Recent episodes have featured James as eliminating several women of color, vying for his affections and falling for Kirkconnell, unaware that she had been photographed at an antebellum South-themed party in 2018 and that she had liked racially insensitive social media posts. Oh, yes, some sort of plantation-themed party. Yes, there were plantations during slavery, and there were plantations after slavery. Southern mansion does not necessarily denote slavery, but this is the way we live now. James himself has also been swept up in the upheaval, writing in a recent Instagram post that the controversy is reflective of a larger issue that the franchise has fallen short of addressing adequately for years. Okay, so ABC Disney says, George Floyd, got to do something here. How about a black bachelor? Yay, everyone is going to love that. No. And wait till you find out the reasons why. This season has been a huge fail, said Justin Kay, who co-hosts the Bachelor-themed podcast Two Black Girls, One Rose, with best friend Natasha Scott. If they had not shoved Matt as quickly as they did into the light as their only answer, this wouldn't be as big of a conversation. But they set this up. Disney, who owns ABC, said, we promise to do better. If you don't want to put in the money, the research, the time, then just don't do it. In other words, too much is never enough. Added Scott, they're patting themselves on the back for having a historic season, but they don't want to deal with anything that comes with that in terms of blackness and what it means to be a black man in 2020. They completely avoided that responsibility. Yes, it's the responsibility of a reality show about marriage to explore what it means to be a black man in 2021. Jennifer Posner, author of Reality Bites Back, The Troubling Truth About Guilty Pleasure TV, said she was not surprised by the controversy. Quote, racism and misogyny have been baked in the DNA of The Bachelor from the very first episode. Empty promises about compassion does nothing to address systemic forms of discrimination, casting, development, and story narrative. Oh, yes, the pain, the pain. If you are interested in less pain, perhaps you should not patronize shows which, again, exist solely to humiliate people in front of millions of people. Okay, but it appears that there is a problem with this first Black Bachelor. Could you guess what it is? He's not black enough. He is not black enough. So are we going to have Nuremberg tests for black people in the United States now? You see, we have someone from that background, but it's simply that superficial token. They are multiracial. It's not like they picked someone whose primary identity is as an African American and who brings that cultural representation to the show. You see, the Black Bachelor has one white parent and was raised in a white milieu, so therefore not black. Hey, Meghan Markle has one white parent and was raised in a white milieu. So how does she get to be super black? Wait a minute. What of Barack Obama? Oh dear. Is he going to have to be canceled as well? Remember, this is all about a reality show. Speaking of Megan Mertz, and I will keep this short because a number of people in the chat yesterday were complaining they had no interest in this subject. Prince Harry, from the Daily Mail, Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz's popularity falls to lowest level ever after Oprah interview, as unwavering support for the Queen retains her spot as Britain's most popular royal. Harry's popularity falls by 3 points since bombshell Oprah Winfrey interview, according to the new YouGov poll. Meghan's popularity drops by 13 points since explosive racism allegations against the royal family were aired. The Queen remains as most popular royal with 80% approval, while Prince William remains second. So there is your Meghan Mertz update for today. Extraordinary. Well, okay, before I get on to that, apparently, it pays. It pays to resist arrest. Now, it may not, pay you, may not benefit you. In fact, you may end up dead, but other people are going to get paid. It happened with Trayvon Martin. This was a young man who didn't seem to be liked particularly much by either his father or his mother. They both considered him to be, too hard to control. So he was shuttled back and forth. This is from the Daily Mail. Minneapolis City Council on Friday agreed to pay $27 million to settle a civil lawsuit from George Floyd's family. Moments after the settlement vote, Council President Lisa Bender offered her condolences. Bender previously sparked controversy by calling for the city police department to be abolished in the wake of George Floyd's death. Family's attorney, Ben Crump, who is America's most successful race hustler, said settlement sends a powerful message that Black lives do matter and police brutality against people of color must end. And of course, I'm sure these people at Minneapolis City Council absolutely didn't consider the possibility that announcing this settlement was somehow going to prejudice the criminal trial of Derek Chauvin. No, that was not in their minds at all. This sort of settlement is fairly new in legal history. I believe it was the famed American attorney Louis Nizer who came up with the idea of pain and suffering settlements. Previously, you had torts. You had to prove that you had suffered damage. No one suffered damage by the death of George Floyd. Certainly not pecuniary damage. In fact, the mother of most of his children summoned them to the television after this began and said, "Do you recognize that man?" And the children said, "No." And she said, "That's your father." So, people's children get killed and you get paid off, which must be a terrible thing. Not only the death of a child, but the sickening feeling that you have crossed a terrible line by profiting by the death of your child, or the death of, I don't know, deadbeat dad. Oh, and here is some shocking news. It's from Fox 5 New York. Michelle Obama considers retirement from public life. What is it you say you do here, Michelle Obama? This is a woman who got into Princeton University on affirmative action basis. Well, legacy, I guess. Her brother was a star basketball player, David Robinson. So her senior's thesis was on how miserable it was to be a black person at Princeton. That's called learning. And so she marries a fellow called Barack Obama. And when Barack Obama becomes a state senator on the health committee in Illinois, a job is created for Michelle Obama, a six-figure job. And when Barack Obama leaves the state senate in Illinois, the job is eliminated. Michelle Obama married the boss, and somehow this is now a career. She's taken up knitting, because of course she has. She says that she has suffered low-grade depression during the pandemic lockdowns and after George Floyd's killing by Minneapolis police last May. Astonishing. So a career criminal and thug and drug addict dies in police custody, and we're supposed to believe that Michelle Obama is going to sink into depression because George Floyd is just like me. He's black and I'm black. Yeah. The woman whose buff biceps and exercise workouts went viral, did they now? During her time as First Lady, said she taught herself to be a better lap swimmer during quarantine because I'm finding in my old age that the high impact stuff I used to do doesn't work. Michelle Obama is 57. Michelle Obama is the most admired woman in America, and I can tell you why. Power without responsibility. It's a soap opera trope. Oh, that, your husband dies and suddenly you're running his company, because of course anyone can run a business. There's soap opera logic, soap opera economics, soap opera titles, public life. Oh, yeah. She's cashing in. She and Barack are cashing in. And you see, Michelle Obama was a well-known, everyone knew who she was. And she lived a luxurious life, and everyone gushed over her. And she didn't have to do anything to get it except marry the boss. That's really not, I suppose it's old-fashioned aspirational, So let's return to James Burnham's discussion of Wilfredo Pareto and the circulation of the elites. By social equilibrium, Pareto means the general state and structure of society considered dynamically at any given moment. That is, the term refers to the state of society insofar as it involves the interplay of those forces that both determine what it is at any given moment, and at the same time, through their operation, work to change its state and structure. What are the forces that determine the social equilibrium that make society what it is and bring about changes in society? Pareto believes the chief of them to be the following. 1, the physical environment. Climate, geographical factors, and the like is plainly of great importance, but since it alters very slowly during historic periods, may be treated as a constant and disregarded when trying to discover the laws of social change and development. 2. Residues are very influential. Residues, Pareto finds, change slowly, remaining remarkably stable, especially within each organized social group. In the end, however, these slow changes alter the whole fabric of social life. Quicker and more obvious in their effect are changes not so much in the residues that are present as in the distribution of residues in the various strata of society. The study of these changes is the distribution of residues can be incorporated into the discussion below. Number 3, economic factors, what Pareto calls interests, have also a major role, as is recognized by almost all modern historians and sociologists. In Mind and Society, however, Pareto does not treat the economic factors at great length. 4, deviations too have a certain influence on the social equilibrium, though Pareto, as we have seen, believes this to be minor and for the most part indirect compared to the other major factors. These non-logical beliefs, myths, formulas are chiefly notable as expressions of residues or interests and for their indirect ability to reinforce residues or to alter the pattern of the circulation of the elites. 5, finally, there are functions what Pareto calls the circulation of the elites. The analysis of this conception will occupy the greater part of this section. Pareto, like all Machiavellians, has thus a pluralistic theory of history. Changes in society do not result from the exclusive impact of any single given cause, but rather from the interdependent and reciprocal influences of a variety of causes, principally, though not only, these 5. Pareto writes, whether certain theorists like it or not, the fact is that human society is not a homogeneous thing, that individuals are physically, morally, and intellectually different. Of that fact, therefore, we have to take account. And we must also take account of another fact, that the social classes are not entirely distinct, even in countries where a caste system prevails. Arid, that in modern civilized countries, circulation among the various classes is exceedingly rapid. We shall consider the problem, in order to simplify it, only in its bearing on the social equilibrium and try to reduce as far as possible the numbers of the groups and the modes of circulation, putting under one head phenomena that prove to be roughly and after a fashion similar. Let us assume that in every branch of human activity, each individual is given an index, which stands as a sign of his capacity, very much the way grades are given in the various subjects and examinations in school. The highest type of lawyer, for instance, will be given 10. The man who does not get a client will be given 1, reserving 0 for the man who is an out-and-out idiot. To the man who has made his millions, honestly or dishonestly as the case may be, we give 10. To the man who has earned his thousands, we will give 6. To such as just managed to keep out of the poorhouse, 1, keeping 0 for those who get in. To the woman in politics, such as the Aspasia of Pericles, the Maintenon of Louis XIV, the Pompadour of Louis XV, who has managed to infatuate a man of power and play a part in the man's career, we shall give some higher number, such as 8 or 9. And Michelle Obama is clearly in that class. To the strumpet, who merely satisfies the senses of such a man and exerts no influence on public affairs, we shall give 0. To a clever rascal who knows how to fool people and still keep clear of the penitentiary, we shall give 8, 9, or 10, according to the number of geese he has plucked and the amount of money he has been able to get out of them. To the sneak thief who snatches a piece of silver from a restaurant table and runs away into the arms of a policeman, we shall give 1. I suppose that would be George Floyd, wouldn't it? But perhaps a 0, because shortly thereafter he ended up dead. To a poet like Carducci, we shall give 8 or 9 according to our tastes. To a scribbler who puts people to rout with his sonnets, we shall give 0. For chess players who can get very precise indices, noting what matches and how many, they have 1. And so on for all the branches of human activity. In some such way, we shall be able to distinguish, at least roughly, the elite, or better, the elites in society from the mass. We shall quickly observe, moreover, that human beings are not distributed evenly over the scale. At the top, there are very few, considerably more in the middle, but the overwhelming majority are grouped near the bottom. The elite is always a small minority. Within the elite, we may further distinguish a governing elite from a non-governing elite. The elite within many branches of human activity, chess playing, for example, from the list quoted, does not exert any appreciable influence on political affairs or social structure. Well, for a little while, Garry Kasparov managed to accomplish this. The character of a society, Pareto holds, is above all the character of its elite. Its accomplishments are the accomplishments of its elite. Its history is properly understood as the history of its elite. Successful predictions about its future are based upon evidence drawn from the study of the composition and structure of its elite. Pareto's conclusions here are the same as those reached by Mosca in his analysis of the narrower but similar concept of the ruling class. I should note, if you remember what I read from that article in Conservative Woman, clearly the these latrine wallahs that were mentioned, who have great power over the lives of Britons and their intimate connections with the pharmaceutical industry. This gives us a very keen insight as to the elite in Britain, that it is, in a word, corrupt. If you look at appointees to Biden's cabinet, such as Treasury Secretary and the like, we're supposed to believe that receiving $800,000 for speeches from a financial organization. No, that's a tiny amount of money. How could this possibly be relevant? We see that the American elite is, just like the British elite, corrupt. Men, don't you just hate them? This is a story from the London Sun. A Green Party peer today doubled down on her call for men to face a 6 p.m. curfew to make women feel safer. Baroness Jones insisted men don't understand the pressure women are under after her comments in the House of Lords sparked a massive debate. Speaking after the alleged kidnap and murder of Sarah Everard, 33, she told a debate in the upper chamber this week that a ban on men being outdoors after 6 p.m. would make women a lot safer. The peer today admitted her curfew suggestion wasn't entirely serious, as I don't have the power to do that, but welcomed any intense scrutiny. A vigil for Sarah and women who feel unsafe and face violence is planned for tomorrow in South London after organizers mounted a legal challenge following a police warning it would be unlawful. Baroness Jones told Sky News, "Nobody makes a fuss when the police suggest women stay at home, but when I suggest it, men are up in arms." When are the police suggesting that women should stay at home? The Baroness said, "You should see my inbox. It's full of misogynistic and racist emails to me." Racist? Racist based on what exactly? That she's Welsh? Is she getting racist insults because of the fact that she is Welsh? Men just don't understand the pressure that women are under, and if this has sparked intense scrutiny, then I'm really happy. She had told Wednesday's debate on domestic violence that a curfew could help cut down cases of discrimination, too. She said, "In the week that Sarah Everard was abducted and we suppose killed because remains have been found in a woodland in Kent, I argue that at the next opportunity for any bill that is appropriate, I might put in an amendment to create a curfew for men on the streets after 6 p.m. I feel this would make women a lot safer and discrimination of all kinds would be lessened." I don't understand the discrimination aspect of this. What is she talking about? White men here? That, the white men aren't going to be discriminating against non-white men after 6 p.m.? Because, of course, non-white men are certainly incapable of discrimination, as we have learned. Her comments came after human remains were found in the case of Sarah, who went missing after leaving a friend's house in Clapham last week. Cops haven't yet confirmed it is her, but a serving Met Police cop has been arrested over her kidnap and murder. Baroness Jones says, "I was just trying to highlight that when the police victim blame by telling women to stay home." Again, when do they do this? We don't react. We just think it's normal. When I suggest it's about men, everyone's up in arms. What's the difference? The difference is that there's misogyny out there. We need to fix it. Perhaps we can just eliminate men entirely. And I guess we'd have to figure out asexual reproduction before then. Government sources dismissed her curfew suggestion as totally bonkers. They said it would be a massive curtailing of basic rights, freedoms, and rights, and would never work. What could have possibly given Baroness Jones this idea? Because curfews and other restrictions on basic human liberty were imposed on Britons beginning a year ago. And, oh, well, the experts say we must do this, so I guess we must. Carolyn Noakes, Tory MP and chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, also said it was a mad suggestion. She said, you can't go around slapping curfews on one gender. Any solution to the real fear that women feel is going to have to be a lot more complex than that. It's a bonkers suggestion, but has got us all talking about what practical steps men can take to make women feel safer. Well, in the case of Sarah Everard, I suppose what this policeman who stalked and allegedly killed her could have done was to have decided to be not evil. Is this what Carolyn Noakes is seriously suggesting? You know, we've heard, since the Montreal massacre back in the 90s, that it is somehow possible to eliminate violence against women. No, it is not possible. Of course, the people who most suffer from violence are, of course, men. But that is never mentioned. Baroness Jones went on to back a cross-party bid to make misogyny and hatred against women a specific hate crime. That is really going to improve relations between men and women. That if some man were to say on Twitter, women talk too much. Oh, it's always about themselves with women. Oh, so someone could be fined or perhaps sent to prison for saying this? Yes, again, this is really pouring oil on troubled waters, isn't it? She said, if anyone is being advised to stay at home, it should be men, not women. This kind of murder is rare, but very scary. What's far more regular are the sexual assaults, threats, intimidation, catcalling, and rude remarks that women face every day. If the police did their job, this misogynistic culture wouldn't thrive the way it has. Is she out of her mind? If the police did their job? The police don't seem to have a particular interest in people stabbing each other in Britain. But they're going to take on catcalling and rude remarks? I don't think I need to remind my audience that women are far more rude to other women than men are. We need to make misogyny a hate crime. This woman is the first Green Party peer. And as I have noted, no one who works for a living has ever voted for the Green Party. The people who vote for, and you know, the growth of the Green Party, its growth in Britain, in Canada, and in other places, in Germany, is an indicator that these countries are close to absolute collapse. Who supports the Green Party? Government employees. Employees of NGOs, people with inherited money. That's who supports the Green Party. Now, there's something about this movement that has not been noted. That is to say, the search for the great white defendant. Who is disproportionately responsible for murders, attacks on women, rapes of women in Britain? Well, we don't want to talk about that, do they? When over the, say, 20 years, when in, up to 10 cities in Britain, Asian gangs were raping, grooming, and then tricking out women, was there a suggestion then that men should face a curfew of 6 p.m.? No, there was not, because that would be racist. But now, these banshees like Baroness Jones, have found a great white defendant, and so they can carry on about their hatred of women, and I don't know, be applauded for it, and for, well, totally bonkers suggestions to be taken seriously. And apparently this was taken seriously in Wales, where Baroness Jones's family comes from. This is from Yahoo News. Wales First Minister Mark Drakeford has insisted he has no plans to bring in a curfew for men to keep women safe. It follows comments Drakeford made to BBC Breakfast on Friday. He had said, if there were a crisis, of course you'd be prepared to consider all measures. A crisis? Oh, I would say rape gangs in numerous English cities would be a crisis. I would say that the onslaught of so-called knife crime could be considered a crisis. How about the breakdown of law and order in cities like London? That could be considered a crisis. No, none of those are crises. It comes as a serving police officer remains in custody on suspicion of Sarah Everard's kidnap and murder, and a separate allegation of indecent exposure. Her disappearance has sparked anger over the safety of women on the UK's streets. The Labour First Minister was asked on BBC Breakfast if we would consider a curfew. He said it wouldn't be on the top of the list of measures that the government would consider, as it would only be a temporary intervention. Yeah, you remember how the lockdowns were supposed to be temporary intervention? You remember how it was going to take 3 weeks to flatten the curve? Does anyone remember that? Drakeford tweeted today, we are not introducing a curfew for men in Wales or even considering it, but he was considering it. This is misleading and deliberately misses the real issue. You see, here we see Wales's First Minister just lying boldly. It's a sad distraction when what's needed is a proper discussion about women's safety and why a woman is killed every 3 days by a man in the UK. I wonder how these figures match historical trends. But again, we have the great white defendant. And there was a interesting hashtag trending on Twitter today, an expression of female rage. Not all men, but all women. Someone called Marla Baird says, sums it up perfectly. Stay sexy and don't get murdered. Okay, Callie J tweets, sex education at season 2 was so moving because it was so relatable. Violence against women is so normalized in society that 97% of young women in the UK have been sexually harassed. Something has to change. Well, if 97% of young women in the UK have been sexually harassed, then this is truly unnormative. What does sexual harassment mean? Well, as we have learned, it can mean an unwelcome compliment. Gee, you're looking pretty today, or is that a nice dress? Yes, these are 2 examples of what may constitute sexual harassment now. Oh, Emma Dugan, who is a woman posting her L's on Twitter, tweets, 18, intoxicated / passed out. Boy from school climbs into bed with me. Said I wanted it. Yeah, okay. Oh, and she adds a graphic. Men should always listen and believe the person who is willing to share their story. No one should have to tell you about their own trauma. Don't ask questions like, are you sure? Why didn't you report? Yes, so if a Black person says that he or she has suffered racism, then it is true and cannot be countenanced. And if a woman says that something has happened, well, it cannot be countenanced because it must be true because a woman is saying it. What if a woman lies about another woman? Do you remember the lesbian astronauts? When one of the astronauts was accused of, from space, cleaning out her wife's bank account, and then it turned out that she had made it up and she went to prison as a result. Does anyone remember that story? It's like the problem with the prejudometer, that when members of racial minorities pointed at other racial minorities, it could explode or catch on fire. So what happens when we have two women who have contradictory stories? Are we supposed to believe both of them? I look forward to an answer to that puzzler. And before I move on to the book club, I am going to take a look at the chat. Hickman Warrior says, how many ex-boyfriends have you taken to the cleaners? Deborah says, LOL, the Queen and William, we are not racist and we work hard to change this perception. The stupid BBC reported no to racism. The monarchy works hard to change. You can't make that up. Women in Spain are whining about gender violence, says Hickman Warrior. Geez Haystyle says she wants to curfew men. UK law enforcement wants to police the internet for mean tweets, but let's ignore grooming gangs and other crimes from those bust into their country. Okay. The Hills Are Alive with Misogyny. We've got to do something about it. It's from the new musical, The Sound of Shrillness. Steve says, do you think the psychotic guy on KMG's hotel lawn will respect the curfew? No. It would be interesting. It would be an interesting experiment. Let's say if in Wales they had instituted this curfew, I think they could actually bring about a revolution in short order. Steve says, this sounds like Halford Mackinder's World Island Heartland theory, kind of obscure these days. This is in response to Hickman Warrior saying white people first emerged around what is now Ukraine. It's the ground zero of Euro whiteness. Okay. Let's move on to the book. It is a book that was published last year by Hachette, or by Public Affairs, which is an imprint of Hachette. And it is called A Libertarian Walks into a Bear, the Utopian Plot to Liberate an American Town and Some Bears, by Matthew Hungoltz Hetling. This is a very amusing book because there is a lot of fun, a lot of amusement to be mined from the thinking and libertarians. I suppose the message of this book could be reduced to libertarianism is weaponized autism. That libertarians believe, have this strange, it's mentioned, I have run into this myself. I've heard serious proposals that sidewalks should be privatized. Oh, okay. How's that going to work? Well, you pay for, the concrete to be laid down in front of your house, and, well, then everyone else will do it as well. Why would they? Some people are just plain antisocial. The kind of people who have rusting cars on their lawns, the kind of people who let the grass grow to 3 feet high, the kind of people who have, loud music blasting out at 2 o'clock in the morning. You never run into anyone like that, libertarians? This comes up in this book, the proposal to privatize roads. Yeah, well, you see, I'll pay for this section of the road, but then everyone else is going to, it's going to be completed section by section based on the willingness of some people to pony up. Do these people have any idea how expensive roads are? And the book begins with a story of man against bear. During the summer of 2016, the firefighter became convinced the bear was watching him. Somewhere up in the tree line for the whole summer, it must have monitored the old schoolhouse on Slab City Road while the firefighter's tall, lean figure moved about below. How else could John Barbiers explain the various times he would leave for a quick errand only to find upon his return that his ramshackle chicken coop, aging apple tree, and makeshift sheep paddock had been de-chickened, de-branched, and de-sheeped, in broad daylight, no less. Even when the bear situation threatened to get out of hand, Barbieres didn't call wildlife officials. Seeking help from the government was not his style. I came to know Barbieres while exploring a series of mysteries in Grafton, a fly-speck town buried in the woods of New Hampshire's western fringe. A rural, isolated community of about 560 homogeneous households. 97% of Graftonites are white, 0% are black. Grafton is a place people come to in search of freedom. Grafton has made national news just twice over the past 20 years. In 2004, it received brief attention as the site of one of the most ambitious social experiments in modern American history, the so-called Freetown Project. Freedom-focused libertarians from around the country announced that they would move to Grafton to liberate it from the strangling yokes of government. Then, in 2012, Grafton rose to infamy again when it hosted New Hampshire's first modern credible account of a wild bear attacking a person in living memory. The two events seemed unrelated, tied together only by the shared setting of a brooding New England forest. But in fact, I was to learn the town's longtime Graftonites, libertarian liberators, and bears of unusual enterprise were connected by far more than the dirt roads wending through its wild hills and valleys. As I circulated among Grafton with a pen and a journalist's notebook, I came to know several among them. Jessica Sewell, a Vietnam-era veteran who became an acolyte of the controversial Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Adam Franz, a poker-playing communist who dreamed of founding a survivalist community. Donut Lady, a kind and giving grandmother who asked to remain anonymous. John Connell, a Massachusetts factory worker on a mission from God. And of course, John Barbieres, the firefighter libertarian who opened Grafton's doors to the Freetown Project and spent the next decade trying to explain it to his non-libertarian neighbors. Now, it turns out that Grafton was, I suppose, a very suitable choice for this Freetown Project because, as the author explains, throughout history, this town of Grafton has decided that it really doesn't like government. Now, of course, New England does not have an income tax or a sales tax, so people in New Hampshire, they're doing very well in that respect. But the people of Grafton do not want to pay any taxes at all, with the result, as described rather movingly in the book, that community life in Grafton has collapsed. The library is opened 3 hours once a week, and some of the people in Grafton think that is too much. How can paying taxes for a public library be justified? The author contrasts Grafton with the neighboring town of Canaan. And he writes, Grafton and its northern neighbor, Canaan, have similar household income stats, but meet their obligations very differently. While almost all public officials in Canaan would describe themselves as fiscally conservative, Grafton has shown a savant-like talent for weaseling out of public costs. It's always been that way. Even in the late 1700s, when Grafton and Canaan were neighboring settlements with just a few hundred residents each, Canaan spent public dollars to feed its militia members during military training exercises, while Grafton voted against doing the same. Back then, these sorts of decisions kept Grafton's tax rate at £2 per £1,000 of valuation, while Canaan residents were taxed more heavily at £2, 3 shillings. Both communities tax residents with the same fiscal goal in mind of growing their populations. If a community attracts and retains people, it spreads the tax burden over more taxpayers and creates a virtuous cycle of economic growth and prosperity. But the difference between the two towns was that where Canaan tried to attract people by emphasizing tax-funded services, Grafton emphasized lower taxes. Inherently statist, the Canaan approach is based on the idea that elected officials are better qualified to spend taxpayer money than the taxpayers themselves. The Grafton approach, on the other hand, is individualistic. People with the freedom to spend their own money make better, more rational choices. Following the American Civil War, New England's agricultural economy migrated west and both communities lost population. Canaan responded by investing in its future, building the sort of public infrastructure it believed would appeal to new residents. Grafton took a different approach. In 1881, when Good Times created a surplus in the town treasury, they voted at a town meeting to give everyone a tax-free year. And in 1909, not long after it first declined to fund a fire department, Grafton stymied a plan to build a $150 police station, leaving a chain of police chiefs no choice but to work, conduct interviews, and store criminal records in their own homes for the next 82 years. Grafton's population in 2010 was 1,340, just a hair more than 1850. But over the same time period, Canaan's population ballooned to 3,909 despite its higher taxes. It was possible to think that Canaan had the better tax plan, but maybe, as the Freetowners likely believed, it was exactly the opposite. Maybe Grafton's taxes were still too high. So Grafton doubled down on its anti-tax war. In 2001, the municipal budget included $520,000 in local tax money, a figure that doesn't account for other revenue sources like state grants. By 2011, the municipal budget contained just $491,000 in taxes. Factoring in inflation, the town had reduced its buying power by 25%, even though the population increased by 18% over the same time period. Not every service was being cut. Indeed, certain expense categories were expanding. Before the Freetown project began, the town's legal expenses were usually less than $1,000 a year. They totaled $275,000 in 2004. But after the Freetown project began, a more litigious mindset emerged in Grafton, and the town's legal bills began to mount, reaching $9,400 in 2011. Grafton and Canaan have drifted so far apart that no one would guess they started at virtually identical sentiments. After 150 years of community building, Canaan had an elementary school, churches, restaurants, banks, a gift shop, 2 bakeries, pet boarding facilities, a metal smithing shop, meeting halls, convenience stores, farms, an arts community, a veterinary clinic, and dozens of small businesses, each of which added something to the town's identity and sense of community. Grafton, by contrast, had a single struggling general store, which closed a few years later, as noted in the book, a suite of chronically underfunded municipal services, and a church celebrating the singular ideas of John Connell. And the church burned down, which is also described in this book. Whether it was arson or not, we will not know. But the church remains a smoldering husk taken over by vermin, because the people of Grafton cannot decide whether any money should be spent to restore it. Grafton, yes, all they have is 3 hours of a library, 1 day a week. Grafton had low taxes, or to be more accurate, taxes that were low in theory. I assumed that after all those years of resistance, Grafton's tax rate would be a fraction of Canaan's, but I learned that the difference is actually quite modest. Because it has managed to maintain larger populations over the decades, Canaan can spend much more on public goods while keeping tax rates in check. In 2010, the tax rate in Grafton was $4.49 per $1,000 of valuation, as compared to $6.20 in Canaan. That means that the owner of a $150,000 home would get an annual municipal tax bill of $673.50 in Grafton and $930 in Canaan. In other words, Grafton taxpayers have traded away all the advantages enjoyed by Canaan residents to keep about 70 cents a day in their pockets. As I say, libertarianism is weaponized autism. But one of the things that occurred to me reading this book was that the existence of towns like Grafton, it's a good idea, for the reason that people who simply cannot get along in society end up in places like this, where their ability to ruin the lives of others is reduced to ruining the lives of the people who've decided to, join a lunatic asylum. Now, Barbieri is actually one of the saner people in this book, because he became head of the volunteer firefighters in Grafton, and he was very passionate. He was very anti-fire. And as we learn in the book, a great many of these libertarians seem to take the view that the government enforcing regulations, say about open fires, that particularly, in a dry season would lead to, grass fires and buildings burning down, that this was an intolerable intrusion on their liberty. Just astonishing. This wasn't a surprise to me, but it is noted in the book that there seems to be a connection between hardcore libertarianism and a fondness for kiddie porn, or the belief that this should be legalized, or that so-called consensual relations between adults and children should be legalized. Now, one of the things that I found surprising about this book is it appears that people have made a profound change in how black bears act. As you probably know, black bears traditionally every year they go into a state which some call hibernation, which is properly called a torpor, where they retreat to a den and pretty much shut down. They don't eat, they don't urinate, and their heartbeat slows down to what, 8 beats a minute? Hang on. Yes, I'll read here. During a New England winter, a bear, or to be more precise, a normal bear, is in the middle of a season-long slumber. For 5 or more months, the bear lives in a den, its heart rate lowered to a somnambulant 8 beats per minute. It does not eat, drink, defecate, or urinate until the warmth of spring signals the promise of new vegetation to eat. Now, New England is rich in vegetation, the kind of stuff that bears like, fruit, nuts, sort of thing. But the presence of people means the presence of garbage, and it also means the non-garbage that people consume. Bears have an extraordinary sense of smell. They can smell a candy bar in someone's pocket from a mile away. Also, where bears are near people, there are very foolish and, in my belief, wicked people who insist on feeding the bears. And thus we get Donut Lady, who decided that she was going to put out food, I believe, sunflower seeds to begin with for the bears. And then she switched to grain. And this was costing her an arm and a leg. And the bears would congregate on her property twice a day. It used to be once a day, and then twice a day. And she would haul out all this grain and dump it. The bears would have their feast. And she put donuts, cheap donuts, on the top. And so, as you can imagine, her property became very popular with the bears. And there was a tremendous increase in the bear population in Grafton and surrounding areas. Now, so overfed were these bears that amazingly, they stopped going through the annual torpor. They were active 12 months a year. Also, they grew to a weight that was heretofore unknown because they were constantly eating. One of the things I learned from this book is that I suppose that if you want to get rid of bears, you feed them chocolate, because chocolate is poison to bears. It is a crime in New Hampshire to feed bears chocolate. A similar thing has been observed with cats, that we have changed their behavior, domestic cats. I saw a BBC documentary about this about a decade ago, where they attached small cameras to the heads of cats. And I suppose this was, out in the suburbs. People would have cat flaps on their doors. And what they found out shocked them, that they found out that cats were traveling, the range that they traveled on a regular basis was far greater than had been previously supposed. And many of these cats had relationships with many satellite families, you could say. Cats are predatory animals. They're hunters. They like to explore and to hunt. But increasingly, it is seen as immoral to allow cats outdoors. Well, it is claimed the reason for this is that cats can do things like be poisoned by antifreeze. But the real reason is that cats are hunters and they kill mice, they kill vermin, and they kill birds. So cats have to be kept indoors, with the result that cats are increasingly becoming fat, neurotic, and destructive. Also, they are transmitting a disease from their excrement to people, particularly women. And this factors into this rather remarkable book. A parasite called Toxoplasma gondii, which was discovered by a French scientist who won a Nobel Prize. Assessing a cat is a challenge for a parasite living inside a rodent, which tends to flee from the scent of cat urine. But researchers discovered that rats infected with toxoplasmosis showed no fear in the presence of cat urine. In fact, the scent seemed to attract and even arouse them. The author of this book comes up with a novel and rather fantastic theory, a hypothesis. Could T. gondii infect bears? Researchers estimate that 1 in 3 humans on the planet are toxo-infected, and some populations of humans have much higher rates, probably based on things like cat ownership, cultural hygiene practices, and access to modern infrastructure. In the United States, the estimated infection rate is 11%, while other countries have rates as high as 60%. One 2018 study found that countries with high levels of infection had correspondingly high levels of entrepreneurship, presumably because the parasite short-circuited the part of the brain that would otherwise instill a fear of business failure. While reading the research, I wondered whether Grafton's libertarian colonizers would find the parasite's actions to be an infringement on their freedoms, or something more like consensual cannibalism, the unfortunate result of an active decision to expose oneself to cat poop. I suppose soon enough that if you tell people that cats are perfectly capable of taking care of their own waste, this will be greeted with scorn and disbelief. What are you talking about? Everyone knows that cats relieve themselves into a plastic dish filled with sand. What are you talking about? So the author suspects, perhaps fancifully, that this disease has changed the behavior of bears and changing the behavior of man, or at least perhaps libertarian men. Cannibalism was mentioned because of the belief expressed by some libertarians that people should be allowed to sign contracts so that they can indulge in consensual cannibalism. Yes. Now, when bears started attacking people in Grafton, this was greeted with the disbelief, because bears do not do that. And bears they're noble animals, you know. And incredibly, the main New Hampshire bear expert blames women, including a shut-in, crippled woman who was attacked by a bear, barely survived. It was her own fault. Why was it her own fault? Because she had food in her house. I am not making this up. And so the donut lady, her behavior was objectively wicked, but she's just a dotty old woman, and one doesn't really expect much from someone like that. This this gross sentimentality about animals one expects from them, but when a government official blames people for being attacked by bears and that somehow they must be bad people, because why would a bear attack them? Well, there's a split in Grafton in the kinds of libertarians. Half of them seem to believe that if people want to feed bears, it's their right to feed bears, because if bears become wholly acclimated to people and come to depend on people as the source of their food, and then there's too many bears, or they run out of food, and so they have to attack people to eat. Well, I suppose people should have better prepared against bear attacks. On the other hand, about half the libertarians believed it was their right to blast away at bears. And this is difficult. This is difficult in New Hampshire because the laws there afford a great deal of protection to bears. And there is a hilarious and infuriating chapter regarding what happened in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is the site of Dartmouth. And bears started showing up. And one of the bears was called Mink. The bear became a celebrity, a local media sensation when neighborhoods full of college students who were just about as careful with their discarded pizza and Chinese food containers as one might expect. Mink got very people-friendly very quickly. She knocked down bird feeders. She climbed into dumpsters, sticking her head up from inside to watch warily as humans walked past. Mink's boldness was largely attributed to an elderly realtor who liked to set out large piles of food to watch Mink eat, eschewing the bargain basement grain and supermarket donuts that made do in Grafton. He put out high-quality black-hulled sunflower seeds and maple-glazed crullers purchased from the same diner bakery that fed Dartmouth professors. When her benefactor died in 2016, Mink began plaguing the rest of the town like an indigent widow, now with 3 young cubs in tow. So, guess what happened? By then, Mink and her cubs were really pushing the limits of acceptable bear raiding. They wandered in and out of garages in search of food. Mink once sat beneath a zip line at Hanover High School, watching the kids pass above her head. Like a sumo wrestler keeping a close eye on a sushi conveyor belt, she attacked a dog, injuring it badly. One of the bear cubs even got into an outdoor hot tub, apparently not realizing that said tub was already occupied by a 9-year-old girl who screamed bloody murder as both escaped uninjured. Pretty simple. You shoot the bears, right? No, that's not what's going to happen in a college town. An enormous amount of time and a fairly significant amount of money was spent to find some way not to kill these ravening bears. And they kept deporting Mink from Dartmouth, and Mink kept coming back, even traveling once 1,000 miles to return to Mink. I'll tell you another fascinating thing that I learned from this book is that llamas are fearsome creatures, and that llamas are capable of driving off a 500-pound bear. I wonder if llamas could actually be trained to protect people from bears. The project, the Grafton project, failed, and the libertarians scattered. There was a bigger project, the Free State Project, Live Free or Die, New Hampshire, of course, and libertarians were going to inundate the place, which eventually they did, 20,000 or so. Anyway, I can't see that it's made a profound effect on New Hampshire. Much more profound is the constant flow of people fleeing Massachusetts who have really transformed the political culture of the state. I mean, New Hampshire votes for Democrats now in the presidential election. But I really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun to read, and it taught me a lot that I did not know about New Hampshire and bears and llamas. Let's go to the chat. Universities have become cesspools of ignorance, says Texas Feral Hog. Steve says some farms do use llamas as guard animals. Facile Goose says, ice llama garrisons for the border. Whoa. Facile Goose again, Wilford Brimley's type 2 diabetic ursine reincarnation. Yes, apparently these overfed bears are developing certain medical conditions, associated in people with obesity. Chocolate is also poisonous to dogs too. Unsurprisingly, same about bears because they're related fairly closely, says William Stewart. Hickman Warrior says, I'd say people are becoming more autistic than ever. Steve says the bear did not accept the non-aggression principle. Brandon Smith says, with a red pointy hat, KMG could be the guy on the lawn. Okay. Okay, the guy on the lawn is jamming KMG's signal. All right. Never deny you're a racist, says Cecil Henry. Reject the term and elevate. Racist is just an anti-white hate term. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay, what is coming up next week? Let's take a look. Let's take a look here. And we'll begin with the music show, Music Monday. On March the 15th, Monday, I'm going to be talking about Joseph Haydn, a true underdog story. One of the greatest men to ever live, and a beautiful man, Joseph Haydn, who came from quite humble beginnings. And on Theater Thursday, we're going to have a little fun next week and talk about both of the Valley of the Dolls movies, Valley of the Dolls, and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And on the book club next week, we're going to talk about Tom Wolfe's final novel, which is about Miami, and it is called Back to Blood. So I will be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to show any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to contribute to this live stream, which would be very much in my interest right now, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, money can be sent directly at a contribution of my live stream via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.